Jane Earl uncovered her calling during a memorable visit to the city's premier gourmet restaurant alongside her father. This experience proved to be extraordinary on multiple fronts. When Jean turned 13, she celebrated her birthday at a fancy restaurant with her dad, where she saw someone do something incredibly nice, something she'd always remember. Even though she never thought she'd get the chance, 20 years later, she paid that kindness forward. Jean's biggest wish was to become a great chef. At 20, she went to France to learn cooking, the country known for its amazing food. After 12 years, she became one of the best. Then she came back to the United States. Jean got a job at a famous restaurant in New York, where people loved her creative cooking, but she missed home in Washington, D.C. Her dad was getting older, so after 8 years in New York, Jean decided to go back to Washington. She took a job offer from one of the best restaurant owners in the city. He offered Jean a fabulous salary, 30% ownership of the restaurant, and complete creative freedom. And on top of it all, attached to the contract was a project that would give Jean her own TV show and national celebrity. It was everything she'd ever dreamed about. Jean flew to D.C. and told her father all about it. "And I'll be here for you, Dad," Jean exclaimed. "Just like you were here for me." Bob Earl kissed his daughter's hands with tears in his eyes. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl," he said. "After all we went through, who'd have believed you'd be the best chef in the world?" Jean laughed. "I don't want to be the best chef in the world, Dad," she said. "Only in Washington, D.C." The next day, Jean set out for the meeting at which she'd be signing the contract that would fulfill her every dream. The Uber dropped her off at the venue for the new restaurant, but as she got out of the car, she caught a glimpse of a green awning. "I know that," she gasped. "That place at the corner." The driver sighed. "That used to be the best restaurant in town," he said. "Senators and presidents ate there, but a few years ago, the owner died, and it had been downhill since then." Jean thanked the driver, but instead of going to her meeting, she crossed the street towards the old restaurant with the shabby green awning printed with the word, Farganetti's. She pushed open the door, and the memories came flooding back. Jean's mom had died when she was just 11, and her father had struggled to keep the family afloat. Bob had fallen into a depression. He lost his job as a copy editor and was forced to freelance. Money was very short, and sometimes dinner was tin ravioli or alphabet soup. It was then that Jean started to experiment with her mom's spices to add flavor to their meager meals. When Jean turned 13, Bob had made a reservation at Farganetti's, the capital's best and most fashionable restaurant. Jean was delighted. She was well aware that her father had been saving for months for this treat. Father and daughter sat down at their table, and Jean read the menu excitedly. "I don't know what to pick," she cried. "What are you having, Daddy?" Bob shook his head. "I'm not hungry, baby girl. I had a huge breakfast," he said. "This is all for you." When the waiter arrived to take their order, Jean said, "I want the Tornadoes Diane and the lobster bisque." "Very good choice, ma'am," said the waiter solemnly. Then he turned to Bob. "And for you, sir." "Oh," Jean cried. "Daddy was so silly. He's been saving to come here for lunch for months, and now he's spoiled his appetite with breakfast." The waiter threw Bob a quick look and saw the man blush. He immediately realized what was going on. Bob had enough for Jean's lunch, but not his own. The waiter, his name was Carl Bader, went to Mr. Farganetti. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "There's this little girl and her father. He's been saving to bring her here for her birthday for months, but he can't afford to order anything for himself. Would it be okay with you if I paid for their lunch out of next week's salary?" Mr. Farganetti shook his head. "No, that is out of the question, Carl. Lunch will be on the house. Go to the chef and tell him I want them to have what he served the president last week and to bake a birthday cake." Jean and Bob had sat and waited nervously for over an hour and were stunned when not just one, but 5 waiters paraded in with a series of gourmet dishes and set them before the father and daughter. "Lunch is on the house with Mr. Farganetti's compliments," Carl said, winking at Chan. "Enjoy." For Bob and Jean, it was a magical meal, and it ended on a high note when the chef himself brought in a wonderful cake ablaze with candles. Father and daughter were on cloud 9 when they walked out. "Jean," said Bob happily, "I have a feeling our luck has changed." And it did. The next day, one of Bob's old friends called and offered him a job at a new magazine he was starting up, and Jean believed Farganetti's had made it all happen. That was when she decided to become a chef. 20 years later, the old restaurant was looking shabby and sad, but Jean recognized the waiter immediately. "Carl," she asked delightedly. "Carl Bader." The man looked surprised. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "How may I help you?" 20 years ago, I came here for my 13th birthday," Jean explained. "You spoke to Mr. Farganetti, and he gave us a wonderful lunch on the house. I'm so glad to have an opportunity to thank you." Carl smiled. "Yes, I remember you," he said. "Sadly, we're no longer as popular as we were. You see, Mr. Farganetti passed away 5 years ago, and he left me the restaurant. He made me promise I'd keep it going, and I've tried, but it hasn't been easy. Our chef left, he went back to France, and the replacement I hired was a disaster. Right now, I'm the manager, waiter, and cleaner. I don't know if I'll be able to keep the doors open much longer." Jean was staring at Carl, and a brilliant idea was taking shape in her mind. "I'm a chef," she blurted out. "I'll turn Farganetti's around. Let's do it for Mr. Farganetti." Carl's mouth hung open. "You're a chef? Really?" "Yes," Jean said. "I'm Jean Earl." "But you're famous," gasped Carl. "I can't afford you." "I don't want your money," Jean declared. "I've got plenty, and I want to help you." She refused the tempting contract she'd been offered and joined Farganetti's. In just a year, the once struggling restaurant became a hot spot, with famous customers lining up for a table. One day, Carl approached Jean with an envelope. "Jean," he said, "I swore to Mr. Farganetti I'd never sell, but I didn't say I couldn't give it away." He handed her a document granting her 50% ownership of Farganetti's, the place that had transformed her life and was now her new path.